Jonathan Arkush is here, the ex-president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews, because, of course, we talk now all the time about the situation in Gaza, about what is happening on the diplomatic front, on the military front. Jonathan here, though, wants to talk to us about Israel marking the 76th Independence Day celebration. Many events, of course, have been cancelled because people are not really in the mood to celebrate. So let's find out what's going on. Jonathan, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Morning, Mike. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Not at all. I mean, you could imagine, I suppose, that there's not much cause for celebration in Israel at the moment. But Independence Day, presumably, normally, is quite a big deal.
It's a public holiday. Israelis celebrate with barbecues and fireworks, and it's a day of tremendous joy. This year will be different. It will be muted, but it's still an occasion to celebrate 76 years of the rebirth of the Jewish nation. And I was at London's main celebration last night at a synagogue in North London where prayers were said, and there were thousands of people there, and it was a tremendously rumbustious occasion with a lot of singing, because at the end of the day, Israel is a state where Jewish people can find refuge. They're no longer defenseless when they're persecuted, and it's still an occasion, therefore, to celebrate.
Yes. And can you imagine back to just last year, the 75th anniversary of Independence Day, could you have ever envisaged what's happened since that time, from, you know, this time last year to now? I can't imagine you would have ever envisaged it.
No. October the 7th was Israelis and Jews' worst nightmare. It was a catastrophic failure of government and security, for which the current Israeli government will undoubtedly pay at the polls, because Israel is a democracy with Western liberal values, and in the end the electorate will have its say, probably after this phase of the war is over.
Yes. And do you think the people who live in London now as Jews feel any safer than they did perhaps in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th? I know that there were so many incidents, and we see these marches that still continue, these pro-Palestinian marches that so continue every single weekend. I mean, how does the community feel about everything at the moment?
Nervous, insecure, and most of us will not walk through central London anywhere near any of these hate marches on a Saturday afternoon or at other times. And that's a pretty terrible thing to say. Furthermore, a lot of Jewish people, not me, but a lot of Jewish people, with good reason, will not walk through the streets with anything that identifies them as Jewish.
Yeah. And many people at the time, immediately after October the 7th, even though the horrific things had happened there, they felt that London and some parts of Europe were actually less safe in a way for Jews than Israel is.
It's a funny thing. Most people, when they're in Israel, feel safer and safe, even though by statistical reasoning, you are less safe in Israel since October the 7th, with attacks from neighbours and even far away Iran. But the fact is, Israel is a state with 9.9 million people, and everyone needs to understand it's not going anywhere. Cries of "go back to Poland" are beyond disgraceful.
Yes, of course. I've been surprised and genuinely shocked as well by the way that the kind of what I call the trendy left has kind of adopted the Palestinian cause. I mean, we know that parts of the left have always had a problem with anti-Semitism, but I've been sort of really quite taken aback by the strength of opinion that seems to side not just with the Palestinian cause, but in some ways even with what happened and what Hamas did on October the 7th.
You have to find an explanation for that, and I've racked my brains and I've tried to avoid concluding that it's somehow some sort of prejudice against Jews and a Jewish state, but I can't reach any other conclusion, because a link between left-wing people and Islamist extremists is completely unthinkable. If you were left-wing extremist, or even a bit left-wing, in almost every Islamic country, if you were a supporter of rights for gay people, if you were a supporter of women's rights, you would be persecuted and probably killed by the state or by Hamas or by Hezbollah. They push gay people off the roofs of high buildings. And yet we have this extraordinarily and frankly absurd link up at these marches between the left, the far left in particular, and Islamic extremists. And I find that absolutely perplexing and illogical.
It is very baffling. And when you see things like the Eurovision Song Contest being hijacked, or an attempt to hijack it was made by, you know, the likes of Greta Thunberg and 20,000 people, you know, trying to prevent a young woman from singing, who happened to sing incredibly well, rather, I just find it staggering that this is the kind of mood that you find in almost every part of the world. It's really odd to me.
What we saw there was a music festival with an Israeli contestant who obviously had nothing to do with the government. She was Israel's chosen, you know, just the same as Britain's chosen competitor, was nothing to do with the government. And yet she was singled out for insult, abuse and threats, so that she had to stay in her hotel room, a 20-year-old young woman. Why? Because she was Israeli. And, you know, if you treat other people differently because of their race, their ethnicity, their religion, in this country, that behaviour can attract both criminal and civil liability. But that is what we are seeing, and it's really quite shocking. Our public authorities, and authorities like the European Broadcasting Union in the case of the Eurovision, must stand up against extremism, and I include universities where we're seeing these protests today.
Yeah. Well, in general parlance, that word that you're looking for there is racism, isn't it?
Well, it is racist, of course, to single out someone. I mean, how would we like it if we were British walking along a street in France and people abuse you and threaten you and affect your security simply because you come from Britain? What's the difference?
I know. It is extraordinary. I'm still absolutely baffled by it. And whenever I speak to senior members of the Jewish community like yourself, Jonathan, I'm always even more puzzled, because you're as puzzled by it as everybody else is. It's just bizarre.
I'm a British Jew. I support Israel. I make no bones. I'm a proud supporter of Israel. But I'm a British Jew, and why someone should want to abuse me in the street, as someone once did after a demonstration and called me a baby killer, pretty absurd allegation, I just don't know. I don't get it at all, Mike.
I know. Well, listen, enjoy the 76th Independence Day. I suppose it's more than one day sort of a celebration at least, and you know, let's hope this time next year things have returned slightly more to some kind of normalcy. Jonathan Arkush, the ex-president of the Board of Deputies of British Jews.